Hello everyone, my name is Jana Belack, and I'm here talking about transforming correctional design for justice reform. A little bit about me. I am a lead designer at Place Taylor here in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and a two-time graduate of the Boston Architectural College. In 2010, I graduated with my Bachelor's of Design Studies in Sustainable Design, and then I went on to complete my Master's of Architecture in 2016 after completing my thesis, A Women's Prison, Communities for Incarceration, which was focused on creating uplifting and supportive community settings for women and their children to end the cycle of incarceration. In 2017, I was honored to be named the John Worthington Ames Scholar, which allowed me the opportunity to travel to the Scandinavian countries of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and also Ontario, Canada, to experience their positive approach to incarceration. Bringing this knowledge back to the BAC, myself and my co-teacher, Randall Emley, created the design workshop Design Convicted, which teaches students through mixed media the past, present, and hopeful future of life without prisons, and instead restorative justice practices. The most beautiful experiences we have had teaching this topic are when you see a student's perspective on incarceration change once they gain an understanding of the negative impact this has on individuals and society as a whole. At least two of our students went on to further explore incarceration through their master's thesis projects, and this is an incredibly rewarding experience. What I'm here to present today is a brief overview of the evolution of reform theories and the designs which carried out those ideas over the past 200 years in the United States. Because in order to move on to a successful future, we need to understand the failures of the past and to also understand what we are working with, because many of these buildings are still in use today. Prior to the 1820s, jails in the United States were single-room spaces where men, women, and children were all housed together without guards, resulting in complete disorder. Food and clothing was also not provided. To alleviate these miseries, society looked to the penitentiary ideas of routine and structure for reform. As the penitentiary model proved unsuccessful by the 1860s, new ideas reform based on sociology and psychology were experimented through the reformatory. The panopticon, which was a design by English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in 1791, was first constructed in the United States in 1922. And in the 1970s, we briefly see correctional centers brought into the urban fabric to reduce travel from distant prisons to the courthouses in the city. And now here we are at 2020, when our incarcerated population is over 1.4 million. It is time for another reform. Two other times to note here are in the 1930s, we see security classifications established, the minimum, the medium, the maximum security, all established by the crime committed. And in the 1980s, we see the prison population skyrocket through the war on drugs. The war on drugs was meant to target the kingpins of the drug industry, but in reality, this targeted the low-level offenders of impoverished communities, disproportionately affecting Black and Brown people. The 1820s saw the emergence of the penitentiary. This was based on reform ideas of the Pennsylvania separate system and the Auburn congregate system. Although they were rivaling designs, they had the common theory that routine and structure would alleviate criminal behaviors, and they sought to do this through silence, obedience, and labor. First, looking at the Pennsylvania or the separate system. This was based on continuous solitary confinement, labor in the cell, strict silence, and they were to seek penitence from God for their criminal behaviors. The offender would remain in this space for the entirety of their sentence. As you can see in the diagram below, this is a layout of what the individual cells looked like. The doors were low, so they had to bow before walking into the space. There was a skylight above where they would look up to God and seek penitence. To the left, we see a realized version of this cell in the Eastern State Penitentiary. And again, you can see here the skylight, the small door. And for the first time, we're seeing heat and plumbing in a prison facility, which is very uncommon because even in the White House at the time of the construction of the Eastern State Penitentiary, they did not have plumbing and heating. The Pennsylvania system was realized at the Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829. As you can see in the floor plan to the left, architect John Haviland arranged the solitary cells and outdoor spaces in a radial pattern. The pink wing notes where now female offenders are being separated from the males. To the right, we see what the Eastern State Penitentiary looks like today, as is now a National Historic Landmark. The original plan called for single-level floor plan so that each individual cell would have a skylight and an outdoor space. But due to overcrowding, by the time of construction ending, they added additional wings of 2 or 3 levels to house additional offenders. Now looking at the AUBURN, or the congregate system. This was based on solitary confinement at night, congregate labor during the day, and a strict rule of silence similar to the Eastern State Penitentiary or the Pennsylvania system. Because of this new program, individual cells were allowed to be much smaller because the offender would only be in here at night for sleep, and they would leave for the day to go work in groups. The images shown here are from Kingston Penitentiary in Canada, which is a replica of the AUBURN system. To the left is a replica in the museum showing what the original cells would look like. But by 1895, the single cells were expanded and 2 individual small cells were made into 1 cell, expanding them to 7 feet by 7.5 feet. To the right, we see a corridor in front of the cells showing how light got into the spaces. And you can see in the ceiling where it is ribbed that each rib was an individual cell. We first see the AUBURN plan realized at the Auburn State Penitentiary in New York. Prior to the AUBURN system coming to this prison, we had a 1-room jail which housed men, women, and children. But in 1821, the AUBURN system of the rectangular prison was built on this site. Similar to the Eastern State Penitentiary, we now see women being separated from men, but in a different way. At the Auburn State Penitentiary, women were housed in cramped attic spaces with the windows blacked out, so they could not spread their deviant behavior to those on the outside or the other men within the facility. Women were seen as the double deviant at this time, because not only were they committing crimes, they were not upholding their duties as a woman. The successes of the penitentiary are few. Violence is minimized by separating individuals into their own cells, but it was not eliminated. Violence occurred when the rule of silence was broken and physical punishments happened. Although basic life needs were met at the penitentiary, food and clothing were provided, and heating and plumbing was provided at the Eastern State Penitentiary. The failures are more common. Long sentences quickly led to overcrowding. Violent punishments were common due to past theories that punishment would alleviate criminal behaviors. The design of the spaces caused severe mental, emotional, physical degradation, most notably through the use of solitary confinement. What resulted, there was no effect on crime rates. Nothing was actually done to promote reform in these facilities. Seeing the failures of reducing criminal behaviors and the negative mental impact on those incarcerated through the use of the penitentiary, reformists in the 1860s sought new theories of reform through social work and psychology. They used education, vocation, and recreation as the basis for the reformatory. Ideas of the reformatory included crime is an illness, so punishment is no longer going to reform criminal behaviors. Psychology and sociology come into play. Psychiatrists are now employed at the facilities and guards will receive training. Smaller populations address the individual's needs. Design is meant to simulate a home life and a life outside of prison, connecting those with society. Nurseries are now common in the women's reformatories so that the children stay with mothers and maintain familial bonds. There are no walls, fences, or security devices. Now we are also seeing that those incarcerated have a voice in how it's operated because they elected offenders within the facility to speak for them with guards and caseworkers when making decisions. And now indeterminate sentencing is also a new theory. Release is based on achievements and self-improvement, not a specified amount of time. The reformatories for men were commonly called community prisons, and a great example of this is the Norfolk Prison Colony from 1932. This was a college campus-style design where there was dormitories rather than cells, an outdoor quad, auditorium, and classroom learning very similar to a college campus. The smaller populations of 50 men per dormitory allowed for individual needs being addressed. And there was no walls, fences, or security devices. The Norfolk Prison Colony still operates today, but it is now the Norfolk Correctional Center and is very common to a modern prison. A great model of the reformatories for women were the state farms. A great example being the State Farm for Women at NIANTIC in Niantic, Connecticut, opening in 1918. This model was meant to teach women education, reading and writing, cultural aspects, arts, and basically uplift them to resume their duties in society. This was a cottage-style design, a self-sustaining farm where the women gardened and basically grew their own food and maintained animals. There was a nursery in this facility for the women to stay with their children to maintain those familial bonds. And again, there's no walls, fences, or security devices. They strongly urged a connection to nature with the adjacent lake, Bride Lake, which was located beside this prison, where women often swam and used for recreation. This prison is still in operation today, but it is now called the York Correctional Institution, and similar to the Norfolk Prison Colony, it has transformed into a modern prison. Here we see the floor plans for the State Farm for Women at Niantic. The second level shows individual bedrooms for the 21 females who would live here. And on the ground floor, we see common spaces of a kitchen, dining room, and living room, which would simulate their home life. The successes at the reformatory were many more than at the penitentiary. Staff and group elected council representing those incarcerated realized that cooperation is much more successful than opposition. The smaller populations encouraged and supported meaningful personal connections and heightened morale. There was more opportunity at the reformatory for education, training, recreation, and varied treatment programs, which addressed individual needs and created opportunities post-incarceration. Failures of the reformatory came from criticisms and opposition from politicians and prison guards who did not see eye to eye with the case workers trying to support the goals of the reformatory. Punishment was continued, as this was a past theory that continued into the reformatory that punishment would alleviate criminal behavior, and security above all won out. Though very minimal, escapes did happen and security took precedent. And all in all, without all of these theories of the reformatory being supported, the whole system failed. Caseworkers were not properly trained, and guards were also not properly trained to support the ideals of the reformatory. In 1922, we see Jeremy Bentham's idea of the panopticon from 1791 realized in the United States. This was based on the idea of control through surveillance, solitary confinement, and labor, very similar to the early ideas we see from the penitentiary, but this came to the United States much later. The panopticon was Jeremy Bentham's theory of observance, meaning that as long as you're being watched or think you're being watched, you will behave appropriately. This model was based on continuous solitary confinement, labor in the cell, and controlling behavior through constant surveillance. As you see in the floor plan here, and the image to the left, there's a guard in the tower, but those incarcerated don't know if they're being watched or not, but the possibility that they are controls their behavior. The panopticon was first realized in the United States in 1922 at the Stateville Correctional Center in Stateville, Illinois. This was called the Roundhouse or the F-House. The result of this design is poor acoustics. Very loud echoes happen throughout this space. It is mentally and emotionally degrading because they are constantly feeling like they are being watched. And it is an antiquated design. Safety and operational hazards occurred and led to the shutdown of this facility. The F-House remains built due to its historical significance, and it actually reopened in 2020 to create social distancing for COVID-19 for those incarcerated. In the 1970s, we see a brief experiment in bringing high-rise carceral facilities to the urban context through the MCCs or Metropolitan Correctional Centers. This was based on the idea of humane design in the urban context, but in reality, these prisons look very similar to any other facility outside of the city. The only difference is they build up rather than build out, but this is due to the constraints of urban development. The Chicago MCC, which is actually a jail rather than a prison, it is more of a short-term facility, by architect Harry Weiss, is a great example of this theory of bringing correctional centers into the urban context. Hidden in plain sight, many people walking down the street would not realize this is a prison. The Chicago MCC is a 28-story triangular footprint, and the individual cells inside were modeled on boat cabins with built-in furniture and tall, narrow windows. The image at the center of this slide shows the circulation opportunities that those incarcerated might experience during their stay here. They will not hit the ground plane, and their only connection to the outdoors is the rooftop exercise yard. The result of the metropolitan correctional centers, they do reduce travel costs from distant prisons to the courthouse when those incarcerated need to travel, but they were designed to be hidden in plain sight, a sort of disguise, not allowing the public around them to know that they are there. This is a missed opportunity to engage those incarcerated with the surrounding community and the amenities that it has to offer in education, healthcare, and social interactions. Over the past 200 years, we have witnessed several designs for prisons promising reform, but they have all resulted in simply detaining those incarcerated until the end of their sentence. Mostly due to overcrowding, the reform theories could not keep up with growing populations. In response to this growing population, the individual prisons have been combined over the time, creating large complexes. Seen here is New Jersey State Prison, which is actually America's oldest operational prison. Opened in 1798 and operating today, you can see how over time different additions have been added. You can see the AUBURN rectangular plan, the Pennsylvania system of the radial plan, and a modern addition to the bottom of the complex. This all designed to house 1,200 individuals. We see the same trend happening across the country, from California to Michigan to Louisiana. Louisiana happens to be the largest corrections complex in the country, where over 5,000 people reside here. Our need to over-incarcerate has led to 2,292 federal and state prison facilities being built in the United States, housing over 1.4 million people. Looking at prisons over the past 200 years, the failures are in the one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one person may not work for another, and each period of reform focused on helping one type of person, excluding the reformatory period. The penitentiary has failed in the solitary confinement, silence, penitence, long sentences, and large populations. Punishment has resulted in physical, mental, and emotional degradation. Opposition between guards and caseworkers has deterred reformatory practices from being successful, and separating those incarcerated from their support systems on the outside leads to higher recidivism rates. The successes, though minor, the lowered amount of violence from separating individuals into separate cells and meeting basic life needs, food and clothing being provided. But the big successes over the prisons of the past 200 years came in the reformatory ideals: joint responsibility, individualized programs, small populations, positive spaces, opportunity, variety in program and design to fit more than just the one-size-fits-all, heightened morale, and addressing the traumas of criminal behaviors. Reform now. It is 2020 and we are looking for new ideas of reform. So why don't we learn from the past, take the successes and get rid of the failures, revive and modernize the reformatory theories. Creating community-style settings rather than isolating institutions will reflect the successful aspects of the reformatory, but we need to ensure proper training for staff and commit to the goal of addressing individual needs rather than strict security. Ideas we can take from the reformatory are joint responsibility, so everyone has a say, individualized programs to address each person's needs, self-improvement, small populations, connections with society are critical, and also is variety. Aspects for the design will include simulating a community modeled on the world outside of prison to alleviate the need to integrate with society upon release. Continual support during and after incarceration, and indeterminate sentencing, release being based on achievements. All this can be done with cooperation and respect between all parties involved. One very difficult aspect we have to overcome is the separation we have created between carceral facilities and society. 53.2% of those incarcerated are 100 to 500 miles from home. Of those people, 25.9 will receive visits. According to the Minnesota Department of Corrections, the average recidivism rate after 1 year of release is 43.3%. We can see a reduction of 13 to 25% in this recidivism rate when visitation from friends and family occurs. In one of the most extreme instances I have found through my research is the Saguaro Correctional Center. This private prison is located in Arizona, but is contracted for the state of Hawaii due to land constraints on the islands. In an article by the Marshall Project, a family of 3 discusses the difficulty in staying connected to loved ones incarcerated here. According to the Marshall Project, 1,391 Hawaiians are incarcerated in Saguaro. To travel to Saguaro to visit a loved one is over 8,000 miles round trip, and the cost is over $2,000. Oftentimes, this can only happen 1 year at the most. As I previously mentioned, I visited Scandinavia to experience their positive approach to incarceration, and I'm aware that we cannot simply pick up their model and drop it into the United States, expecting the same results, but there are many aspects I believe would translate. The first being maintaining a sense of self while incarcerated. The first day that I was in Finland meeting with the Criminal Sanctions Agency, I referred to those incarcerated as inmates. They stopped me and said, "We do not call those incarcerated inmates, we call them clients, because we as a society have failed them, and it is our job to improve them." Next, traveling on to Sweden, I posed the question the first day that I met with the Criminal Sanctions Agency there. I said, "Do you refer to those incarcerated as clients or inmates, or those incarcerated? What do you refer to them as?" And they looked at me strangely and said, "We call them by their name." They simply call them by their name. The second aspect we could bring back to the United States is simulating a normal lifestyle, which is what we have talked about with the reformatory. In Scandinavia, the loss of freedom is the only punishment. The third aspect is meaningful experiences, also something that is present in the reformatory model. Positive environments and interactions between staff and clients occur daily. One aspect that I believe really would maintain familial bonds is a reprieve. In the open prisons in Scandinavia, they're allowed time away, maybe a weekend, to spend time with family and friends and really get a chance for a mental and emotional escape of incarceration. While I was at Halden Prison, I spoke to this man in the picture playing the guitar, Sam Tax, and I spoke with him at length in his recording studio about the situation of prisons in Scandinavia versus the United States. And he said to me this quote, "You must take this to America. Treat people with respect and they will not be mean. If you give respect, you will get respect." And this picture is Sam Tax and his band, which is guards at Halden Prison, playing in the restaurant at Halden Prison. I will leave you with this image from Vankila, a women's prison in Finland, which is designed to simulate a community-style living and has proven successful in their very low recidivism rates.